thought about the consequences down the road, maybe when a lot of us aren't even here anymore, of a yes vote on 2-day rentals. We all know that Airbnb, VRBO are in business, they're in business to make money. They are going to come in here, in my opinion, and swoop up every property that's for sale over the next few years and turn them into 2-day rentals, okay? And our amenities right now do not support that kind of traffic. Let me just say this too. I have seen this happen in 2 different states, both of which are, quote, vacation areas. And the impact on short-term rentals on residential communities has been horrendous. And in fact, they've overturned rules allowing short-term rentals. They banned them to specific resort zones. Mm-hmm. The second thing I wanted to say was,
City of Brevard.
I lost my train of thought. There's the issue of reasonableness. Now, I know there are probably attorneys in here who may disagree with me, but from what I've read is North Carolina law does permit POAs and HOAs to restrict the term of rentals to something that is reasonable and in keeping with the character of the community. The character of our community does not support 2-day rentals. And let me just further say this. I personally lived across the street from a short-term rental for 2 years. They were people in and out of there every couple of days. It was an absolute nightmare. And people have questioned me, well, did you ever complain? There goes my bell. Yes, we complained about the noise, the lights, the double parking. So I'm just asking everybody to remember reasonableness. 2 days is not reasonable here.
Thank you. First of all, there is no evidence that institutional investors are coming in and buying up properties in Coniston Falls. 88% of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit were residents, part-time residents that either rented their homes when they weren't here, full-time residents that wanted to retain the right to rent their home when they're not here. Institutional investors are going out and building entire rental communities. They're building communities with 1,000 homes in them designed to accommodate short-term rentals. There's going to be some onesies and twosies coming in of investor-owned properties. But this notion that the institutional investor and the renters are massing outside of our gates and waiting for us to throw our gates open is not supported by the data. I forgot what your second point was, Diane. What was it? Can you remind me?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Reasonableness.
Reasonableness, because North Carolina law does say, and you guys can correct me if I'm not right, that POAs and HOAs can restrict rental terms if they're reasonable and within the keeping of the character of the community. And they were saying, maybe that's 60 days, maybe that's 90 days. And my point is, I don't think 2 days is reasonable within the keeping of the character of this community.
The concept, you're correct in referring to the concept of reasonableness, but it's reasonableness in light of the original and contractual intent of ownership, which again, and I hate to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it goes back to the original intent of our covenants, which contain no restrictions. There's been an argument suggested on next door that, well, if we can't amend our covenants to restrict rentals, then how can we restrict paint colors and the cutting of trees. Well, the fact of the matter is, the original covenants from 1971 created the Architecture and Environment Committee and gave the community, the POA and the board and that committee at that time in 1971 the right to regulate those matters. But what our covenants did not do originally was to restrict rentals. And in fact, it contemplated rentals. And in fact, 40% of this community owns as a second home, and those folks tend to rent. And there has only been one amendment since then. It was in the fourth restatement and the fifth restatement, and all it said was no transient tenants. But what does no transient tenants mean? It's an ambiguous phrase. So what the courts are clear in saying is that you cannot take away a common law property right, the right of ownership, and think of ownership as a bundle of sticks. One of the sticks in the bundle of your rights of property ownership is the right to rent it out. That's just a fundamental right. I wish I didn't have to point this out, because I get the concern over STRs. I get the fear that we may turn into a resort community that we don't want to be. I get all that. But we're dealing with a reality. That's what we set up here. We're dealing with the reality of the law and minimizing the risk of litigation, of successful litigation against the community. And so there's this fundamental right that's protected. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. And so the phrase no transient tenants it's ambiguous. What does that mean? 1 day, 2 days, 14 days? There's no shared understanding. The bottom line is you cannot take away these fundamental rights unless there is a clear contractual agreement. That's the law.
Let me mention one other thing, and Howard, there's 3 people behind you that have not spoken yet, so we will hear from them first.
No, we
Howard, we'll hear from them. No, Howard, no.
Let other people talk.
Let me,
It doesn't matter, you've had your say, sit down and let other people talk. Be polite. I didn't see anybody behind me.
let's be respectful. I wanted to make one other point, if I could, before we hear from you. The attorney that drafted the 4th and 5th restatement was Robert Dungan. Robert Dungan, in 2016 or 2017, in an opinion letter to the board, said that if the board tried to impose a lease term restriction of any duration greater than 2 nights, that the board would likely lose if challenged in court. Okay, that was specific opinion from the attorney, Dungan, who represented Coniston Falls from about 1980 to like 2018, that if we were to base